Sergeant Ward, this is Snowfield Medical Center. Your daughter's heart just collapsed. She's fighting for her life, and we can't reach your wife. Sir, you need to come now. But while a father was racing through a winter storm, someone else was standing over his little girl's hospital bed, pulling the oxygen away. In this world, we meet many people, but only a parent's love stands between life and darkness. Cherish those who protect you. Guard the ones who can't guard themselves. Before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching. Leave your city in the comments, and if you believe God sends miracles through ordinary people, subscribe and watch until the end. This story will stay with you long after the snow melts. The storm had crept in before dawn, turning Snowfield, Wyoming, into a world of muted light and endless white. Flakes drifted past the windows of the small wooden house on Hemlock Road like tiny pieces of frozen ash, settling thick across the roof and burying the walkway outside. Inside, Sergeant Ethan Ward moved through the early quiet of his living room with the disciplined precision of a man who had lived half his life in conflict zones. Ethan was 36, tall, broad-shouldered, with a rugged jaw marked by faint scars from shrapnel and a short dark beard that grew uneven when winter dried his skin. His hair was trimmed close to regulation length, black with the slightest hint of gray at the temples. His storm blue eyes carried the gaze of someone who had seen too much, fought too hard, and still tried to hold the world together for the tiny girl who depended on him. He carried the remnants of the past along his spine. Memories of Afghanistan, of brothers lost, of an avalanche during rescue training in Alaska that had nearly crushed him. Those events carved him into a man steady as a mountain, but wary of the fragility of life. On the couch curled a small girl under a wool blanket, Lucy Ward, 9 years old, with a face as pale as the snow outside. She had soft chestnut brown hair that fell in gentle waves to her shoulders, often tied in a clumsy ponytail when she tried to do it herself. Her eyes were wide, hazel, and gentle, the kind of eyes that always glistened with too much emotion for someone so young. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her small, frail chest rising with effort. Lucy had been born with a congenital heart defect. Her heart beat with the fragile rhythm of an old clock, always threatening to stop. Yet she carried a bravery beyond her size, rarely complaining, always smiling when Ethan returned home from missions. She was Ethan's entire world, the only piece of joy left after the death of his first wife during a blizzard 7 years earlier. At Lucy's feet lay Shadow, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a thick coat of black and tan fur dusted by the cold air seeping through the window frame. He was large for his breed, with strong shoulders, intelligent amber eyes, and movements sharp with the precision of a fully trained canine. Shadow had been Ethan's partner before retirement, one of the few dogs capable of scent tracking in blizzard conditions and detecting collapsing snow layers. The dog had saved Ethan's life twice and had become Lucy's silent guardian ever since. His instincts were sharp, protective, and almost eerily perceptive when it came to sensing danger or distress in the little girl. Ethan slipped a hand onto Lucy's forehead, warmer than she should be. "You're okay, sweetheart?" he murmured, voice low, gentle to dull, nothing like the commanding tone he used with his squad. Lucy nodded weakly. "Just tired. It's the cold." Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the helplessness that always came when Lucy's heart reacted to winter. "I'll get your medicine." From the kitchen doorway, a soft voice chimed, deceptively sweet. "I already gave it to her, Ethan." It was Vanessa Hale, Ethan's wife of 2 years. Vanessa was 33 with delicate features and the kind of beauty people trusted instantly. Her hair was long, black, and always styled in loose, elegant waves that brushed her waist. She had fair skin, tall, slender limbs, soft pink lips, and dark almond-shaped eyes that could look warm in public yet calculative when no one was watching. She wore pale makeup that highlighted her cheekbones, and she held herself with the graceful poise of a professional, an experienced pediatric nurse, trained to bring comfort. That was the woman Ethan believed he had married, kind, patient, nurturing, a balm to the wounds Lucy's illness carved into their days. Inside, however, Vanessa carried a different storm, a deep envy that curdled into resentment. She had grown up poor in Montana, the forgotten middle child in a family that never noticed her achievements. She learned early that the world rewarded performance, not truth. When she met Ethan, She saw stability, respectability, and a life far removed from her past. But what she hadn't expected was Lucy, sick, fragile, and always needing attention. Vanessa's affection curdled into annoyance, then anger. She hid it well behind soft smiles and gentle touches when Ethan was home, only letting the cruelty seep through when he wasn't looking. Ethan turned toward her, relieved. "Thanks, Vanessa, I appreciate it." She smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Of course, anything for family." Lucy lowered her gaze, fingers curling around the blanket. She didn't answer. Shadow's ears flicked sharply, catching the strange tension beneath Vanessa's voice. Ethan didn't notice. He never wanted to believe something was wrong. Not again. Not after losing his first wife to the snow. He couldn't bear the idea that he had chosen wrong a second time. He checked the clock on the wall, nearly 0700. Time to return to Fort Glacier Base, the isolated Marine outpost 20 minutes north, where he would lead a winter search and rescue training unit. "I'll only be gone 4 days," he told Lucy softly. "I'll call every night." Lucy tried to smile. "Be careful, Daddy." Her voice cracked, too thin for his comfort. Shadow nudged her hand, whining softly. Vanessa stepped forward, touching Ethan's arm. "We'll be fine," she said, tone serene. "I'll take care of everything. Lucy will rest. Don't worry." Shadow's tail stiffened. Lucy's fingers trembled, but Ethan saw only the promise in Vanessa's carefully crafted expression. He kissed his daughter's forehead, scratched Shadow between the ears, and headed to the door to grab his marine coat. He paused. Winter clawed at his instincts. Something in him whispered that he shouldn't leave. "Vanessa, her medicine, I told you," she said, smiling wider. "I handled it." Shadow growled under his breath, so low Ethan barely heard it. Outside, the snowstorm howled. Duty pulled him from the doorway like a force he couldn't resist. When he finally stepped out, the wind swallowed the sound of his boots, and the house door shut behind him with a soft, final click. Inside the living room, the moment Ethan's truck disappeared into the blinding white, Vanessa's expression collapsed into something sharp and cold. "Get up," she snapped, her voice stripped of all sweetness. Lucy flinched. I'm dizzy." "I don't care. Take your pills yourself." Vanessa shoved the bottle toward her. "You're old enough." Shadow stepped between them, hackles rising. Vanessa's lip curled. "Move, mutt." She reached for the bottle on the counter, then deliberately tipped it, pills scattered across the floor like fallen snow. "Oh dear, guess you'll manage somehow." Lucy crawled shakily to pick them up. Shadow pressed close to her, trying to help. Vanessa leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, eyes glinting with contempt. "You're a burden, you know," she murmured. "Always sick, always whining. Ethan would be better off without all this." Lucy's vision blurred. Her heart fluttered painfully in her chest. Shadow barked sharply, stepping in front of her as if shielding her from the words. From outside, the wind slammed against the windows. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Honestly, winter can take so much away. Sometimes it takes the wrong things, sometimes not." Lucy froze, breath hitching as her heart stuttered. Shadow growled. Vanessa smirked, and far away on the ice roads of Fort Glacier Base, Ethan felt a chill run through him, not from the snow, but from a fear he couldn't name. He had no idea what was happening inside the house he had just left. Yet, Snowfield, Wyoming lay buried beneath a storm so violent that even the pine trees bent like dark silhouettes, bowing under a crushing weight. Inside the small wooden house on Hemlock Road, the temperature had begun to dip despite the heater's constant hum, and the shadows in the corners stretched long like silent warnings reaching toward the center of the room. Lucy Ward sat slumped on the rug in front of the couch, her breath thin, her vision narrowing into a small tunnel of dim light. The 9-year-old girl's fragile body trembled as cold sweat broke across her pale forehead. Her delicate frame, already weakened by a congenital heart defect, now struggled against something far heavier, several days of missing medication and a day filled with stress, fear, and a cruelty she didn't have the strength to name. Her chest hurt. Not the little twinges she was used to, but a deep, squeezing ache that radiated down her arm. When she reached out with a trembling hand toward the coffee table where her father always kept the house phone, her fingertip missed it by an inch and dropped helplessly to the carpet. Shadow, Her 5-year-old German shepherd sensed the disaster before Lucy fully registered it. His amber eyes widened, his ears perked sharply, and his muscular frame stiffened. His instincts, honed during years as a canine trained to detect distress, flared in an instant. The dog nudged Lucy gently with his muzzle, whining as her head lolled weakly toward him. "Shh, Shadow," Lucy whispered, voice thin as the wind rattling the window panes. Vanessa Hale stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, her silhouette framed by the dim overhead light. The 33-year-old nurse looked flawless as always, long black hair cascading over her shoulders, tall, slender form draped in a soft gray sweater that contrasted with her pale skin. Her almond-shaped eyes held a kind of cold amusement, the sort of emptiness one would expect from someone watching a stranger struggle rather than a child. "Well, that's dramatic," she muttered, tapping her fingernail against the counter. "You're not dying tonight. Stop making it look so tragic." Lucy's breaths were shallow, irregular. She tried again to reach for the phone, but her small body crumpled sideways. Her heart fluttered like a bird trapped in a shrinking cage. Vanessa walked past her with an exaggerated sigh, picking up her own mug from the counter. "You want the phone?" She held it up mockingly. "Oops." She dropped it back onto the table just out of Lucy's reach and walked toward the stairs. "Take care of yourself for once," she said, taking a slow sip. "I'm done babysitting." Shadow growled, low, threatening, primal. Vanessa glared back. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "If you touch me, I swear." But the growl wasn't for her anymore. Shadow turned back to Lucy, nose nudging her cheek, paws shifting rapidly as if calculating the exact steps needed to save her. Lucy's breathing stuttered and stopped. Shadow reacted instantly. The phone was still on the table beside the couch. With a powerful leap, the dog placed his front paws on the wooden surface, causing the device to slip, bounce once, and hit the floor. The impact triggered a sound, the dial tone. Shadow pressed his paw onto the keypad. Random tones chimed, and then, by sheer luck or fate, 3 digits activated. 911. The line connected. A calm operator answered, though she could only hear heavy breathing and frantic shuffling from the dog. "This is Snowfield Emergency Dispatch. What is your emergency?" Shadow barked, sharp and urgent. The operator, Marla Jensen, a woman in her early 40s with short auburn hair, a round face, and a reputation for trusting her instincts, paused. Marla had survived a house fire at age 15, and from that day forward, she never ignored distress, not even the strange ones. Her tone shifted. "Is someone in danger? If you can hear me, bark again." Shadow barked once, forcefully. Marla's voice tightened. "We're tracing your location now. Stay on the line." Shadow nudged Lucy again, whining loudly so the operator could hear the desperate sounds of distress. "I'm dispatching units," Marla responded. "Hold on, sweetheart. We're coming." She alerted ambulance driver Tom Barringer, a sturdy 50-year-old with salt and pepper hair, a thick mustache, and the calm demeanor of a man who had seen life and death more times than he liked to admit. His partner, Haley Moore, a 28-year-old paramedic with dark curly hair, warm brown skin, and sharp medical instincts, grabbed her emergency kit. They pushed through the snow in their ambulance, chains gripping the ice, lights glowing red through the swirling blizzard. Back at the house, Vanessa froze at the sound of sirens growing closer. Her eyes widened, not with concern but with sudden panic. She rushed to the window, biting her lip. "You little brat," she whispered. Shadow placed himself protectively over Lucy, his warm body pressing against her tiny frame. Moments later, the front door burst open as Tom and Haley rushed inside. Tom scanned the room with trained eyes. "Where's the patient?" Shadow barked sharply and ran in small circles before stopping right beside Lucy's limp body. He nudged her shoulder and looked up at them. Haley's expression changed instantly. Kneeling beside the girl, she checked Lucy's pulse, thin, rapid, unstable. "She's going into cardiac distress," Haley said urgently. "We need to move her now." Vanessa descended the stairs slowly, quickly masking her fear with a trembling voice. Is she okay?" she asked, voice fragile and breathy like a woman trying to feign innocence. Haley didn't even look at her. "How long has she been like this?" I don't know," Vanessa stammered. "I was upstairs. She must have... I didn't realize..." Shadow snarled softly. Tom noticed. He gave Vanessa a quick, assessing look, not believing her but too focused on the child to challenge her. They lifted Lucy onto the stretcher. Shadow tried to climb after her. "No, buddy," Tom said gently, blocking him. "You can't ride with her, not in this storm." Shadow whimpered, pacing anxiously. Haley knelt briefly to scratch behind his ears. "We'll make sure she's all right," she said softly. "I promise." As the stretcher rolled out into the storm, Shadow barked desperately, fighting against the grasp of a young firefighter named Connor Blake, a new recruit in his early 20s with short sandy hair and boyish freckles. Connor wrapped his arms around the dog to stop him from chasing the ambulance. "Easy, boy," Connor murmured. "We'll take care of you." The ambulance roared into the white night. Vanessa stood by the doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest, breath short and shallow. But her mask dropped the moment they disappeared. "Damn it!" she hissed, gripping the doorframe tightly. At that exact moment, 20 miles north in a stark white training field at Fort Glacier Base, Sergeant Ethan Ward stood beside a convoy of armored vehicles, briefing his team. Wind slashed across his face, carrying ice shards, but he barely noticed. His mind had drifted to Lucy several times that evening, the unease growing heavier with each hour. Then his phone buzzed. He almost didn't check it until he saw the number. Snowfield Medical Center. A cold dread crawled down his spine as he answered. "Sergeant Ward?" a voice asked. It belonged to Dr. Rowan Spaulding, a seasoned ER doctor in his mid-50s with a stern face softened by years of compassion. He had silver hair, tired blue eyes, and the steady voice of someone who had delivered countless difficult news. "Yes," Ethan replied sharply. "This is Ward." "Your daughter has been brought in under critical cardiac distress," Dr. Spaulding said. "You need to come immediately." Ethan's lungs locked. "What happened?" he demanded. "Has she taken her medication? She should be stable." "That's the issue," the doctor replied, tone tightening. "Based on what we're seeing, it appears Lucy may have missed several doses this week." The world stopped. Ethan felt as if the frozen earth had cracked beneath him. "Impossible," he whispered. "Her stepmother was supposed to—" "I'm sorry," Dr. Spaulding interrupted gently. "But your daughter needs you here as soon as physically possible." The line went dead. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. In one motion, he grabbed his coat, sprinted across the snow to the command tent, and burst through the door. "Emergency med-flight authorization," he barked. "Now!" The commander, a stern woman named Lieutenant Avery Clark, tall with cropped brown hair and the no-nonsense posture of a career Marine, looked up sharply. "What's wrong, Ward?" "My daughter," Ethan said, voice shaking for the first time in years. "She's dying." Avery didn't hesitate. "Prep the helicopter," she shouted to the nearest pilot. Within minutes, the storm-dark sky trembled with the roar of a military chopper slicing through the snow. Ethan climbed aboard, gripping the metal frame as the rotors spun. His jaw tightened, his eyes burned. Someone had failed Lucy, and as the helicopter lifted into the white void, Ethan felt a fury rise within him he hadn't felt since war. A fury that would only grow when he learned the truth. The storm outside Snowfield Medical Center had thickened into a wall of white. Snow hammered the glass, hissing along the metal frames, and the power flickered as if the winter itself were holding its breath. Inside, the hallways glowed in pale fluorescent light, quiet except for the occasional beeping of machines and the low murmur of voices from patient rooms. The scent of antiseptic clung to the air like a second skin, cold, sterile, unsettling. Sergeant Ethan Ward burst through the hospital's main doors, boots thudding against the clean tiles, shoulders still dusted with snow. His face, normally disciplined and controlled, held a raw desperation that made nurses glance up in alarm. The 36-year-old Marine was tall, his broad frame outlined by his winter military coat, his breath still heavy from sprinting straight from the helipad. His short black hair was damp from melted snow, his jaw clenched so tightly it made the scar under his left cheekbone stand out sharply in the bright corridor lights. "Sir, can I help?" a nurse began. "My daughter," Ethan rasped, voice shaking. "Lucy Ward, 9, cardiac distress. Where is she?" The nurse, Kendra Lawson, a petite woman in her early 40s with deep brown skin, curly short hair, and warm but alert eyes, quickly tapped into her tablet. Kendra was known for her calm presence, a trait forged after losing her own newborn to a heart defect 15 years earlier. Since then, she carried an unspoken vow to fight for every fragile child under her care. "She's in room 407, Kendra said, looking up with urgency. "The cardiology wing. Go straight down this hall." But Ethan was already running, his boots pounding the linoleum like war drums. Downstairs, in the hospital's small intake holding area, Deputy Mark Hill, a stocky sheriff's deputy with a round face, reddish beard, and weather-worn skin, stood beside Shadow. Mark was in his late 30s, kind-hearted and humble, the type of man who volunteered at the animal shelter every Christmas. He had responded to the ambulance call, and when he saw Shadow's frantic pacing and refusal to be separated from the stretcher, ordered an officer to bring the dog to the hospital. Shadow, massive and alert, paced in tight circles, hackles raised, claws clicking anxiously against the tile. His eyes, sharp amber flecked with gold, snapped toward every sound, muscles coiled, waiting for Ethan. Mark saw the Marine sprint past the glass doors and whistled low. "That's my cue." He unclipped Shadow's temporary lead. The German Shepherd lunged forward, sprinting after Ethan with stunning speed. Nurses leapt aside as the dog flew down the hall, his paws a blur, his body narrowed into a perfect line of purpose. Ethan didn't need to look back to know it was Shadow. He heard the claws, felt the presence, and something in him steadied. They were a pack again. But upstairs, inside room 407, danger had already begun. Lucy lay small beneath the white hospital blanket, her brown hair fanned across the pillow like soft threads. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and the oxygen tube at her nose kept her breaths thin but steady. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant, lemon floor cleaner, and the sterile chill that always lived in cardiac wards. Beside her, Vanessa Hale stood with her back slightly turned, long black hair spilling over her shoulders like ink over snow. At 33, she looked like a painting. Tall, elegant, flawless. But her dark almond-shaped eyes flickered with something sharp, something venomous, when she glanced at the oxygen tube. "No one will ever know," she murmured. Her voice was almost gentle. Lucy's eyelids fluttered. She could barely keep them open, but fear swelled inside her chest like ice water. Vanessa leaned closer, her lips curling into a soft smirk that held no warmth at all. "If you disappear, everything of Ethan's becomes mine. His house, his money, his life, everything." Lucy's breath hitched, too weak to form words, too terrified to cry. Vanessa's fingers reached toward the oxygen tube. Her hand trembled, not from guilt, but from anticipation. And then she pulled. The thin tube popped free. Lucy's body jerked violently, her chest constricting as her oxygen-starved heart panicked. Her tiny hands clawed at the air, reaching for something, anything, while her legs kicked weakly beneath the blanket. Her lips began to lose their color, turning a faint shade of blue. Vanessa stepped back, watching, breathing slowly, like someone admiring the slow dimming of a light. "You're too fragile for this world," she whispered. "Ethan will recover. People always do." Lucy's eyes widened, tears pooling. Her small hand lifted toward Vanessa, begging, but Vanessa only tilted her head, expression unreadable. Then, the door slammed open. The blast of force echoed across the room like a gunshot. Shadow barreled in first, a blur of black and tan fur, teeth bared, barking with violent fury. Behind him came Ethan, snow-soaked, breath ragged, eyes blazing with a rage that could melt steel. "What the hell are you doing?" Ethan roared. Vanessa's entire body froze. Shadow leaped between Lucy and Vanessa, positioning himself firmly in front of the child, muscles taut, growl rumbling deep in his chest like distant thunder. Ethan lunged toward the bed, grabbing the fallen oxygen tube with one hand while steadying Lucy's trembling body with the other. His hands trembled as he reattached the tube, his fingers moving with desperate speed. "Breathe, Lucy. Come on, baby, breathe." His voice cracked. The oxygen hissed faintly into the prongs. Lucy shuddered, then inhaled a jagged breath. Her eyes welled with tears of relief and terror. Behind them, Vanessa stepped backward, face draining of color. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Two nurses rushed. In, first Lily Armand, a tall woman in her early 30s with blonde hair and a tight bun and freckles across her nose. Fiercely focused and known for her sharp instincts, and Miguel Duarte, a soft-spoken Hispanic nurse in his late 20s, with gentle brown eyes and a calm presence. "What happened?" Lily shouted. Ethan didn't look up. "Ask her," he snapped, voice low, trembling with fury. Ask her what she was doing with the oxygen tube. Lily turned toward Vanessa. Miguel's eyes widened. Vanessa forced a trembling smile. I was just adjusting it. It slipped. I didn't. Shadow barked sharply, once, loud, cutting through the lie. Lucy shook her head weakly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her voice barely escaped her lips. She pulled it out. The room went dead silent. Ethan finally turned toward Vanessa, and something inside him, something soft, forgiving, hopeful, died in that moment. His voice was cold steel. From now on, he said slowly, every word sharp as a blade, you are nothing to this family. Vanessa's lips quivered. Ethan, I didn't. She's lying. She's confused. But Ethan stepped toward her, his expression colder than the storm outside. Get out, he said. Get out before I call security. Vanessa took one step back, then another. Her breath came fast and shallow, as if the walls themselves had begun to collapse around her. She looked at Lucy, then at Shadow, and then at Ethan. The Marine's eyes held no softness, no forgiveness, nothing left for her. And something in Vanessa snapped. She spun on her heel, heels clacking sharply across the tile, and bolted out of the room, her long hair whipping behind her like a dark ribbon. Footsteps echoed down the hallway as she disappeared into the cold fluorescent maze of Snowfield Medical Center. Inside room 407, Ethan sank onto the edge of the bed, gathering Lucy gently into his arms. Shadow rested his head beside Lucy's shoulder, still trembling from the adrenaline. You're safe now, Ethan whispered, though fear still clawed at his voice. I'm here. I won't leave again. Lucy clung weakly to his uniform, her breath still shaky but present. Outside the window, the blizzard pressed harder against the glass, as if the storm itself knew this was only the beginning. Snowfield fell behind like a fading lighthouse as Vanessa Hale sped north through the blizzard, her SUV fishtailing across the frozen asphalt of Highway 91. The world outside her windshield was a blur of violent white, the wipers scraping frantically, barely clearing anything at all. Her long black hair clung wildly to her cheeks, mascara smeared in jagged streaks down her pale skin. Her almond-shaped eyes, usually composed and almost seductive, were now wide with panic, darting between the rearview mirror and the snowy road ahead. Every breath she drew trembled, shallow and erratic. She had never driven in a storm this severe. She had never run from anything this big. But after Ethan's accusation, after Lucy's trembling words and Shadow's growl, Vanessa felt her perfect facade collapse entirely. The panic became something animalistic, pushing her forward faster, deeper into danger. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Her expensive coat, cream-colored wool with silver buttons, was already dusted with snow that had blown into the SUV through a cracked window. Everything was supposed to be mine, she muttered through chattering teeth. Everything. Far behind her, Snowfield Sheriff's Department had exploded into motion. Deputy Mark Hill stood inside the communications room, snowflakes melting in his reddish beard, radio in one hand, his breath still heavy from sprinting up 2 flights of stairs. The stocky, good-natured deputy looked nothing like his usual warm self. His round face was tight with urgency, his gentle hazel eyes, normally soft, now hardened with determination. We've got an active fugitive heading northbound, he barked into the mic. Suspect Vanessa Hale, armed with a vehicle, last seen at Snowfield Medical Center, attempted homicide on a child, all units mobilize. The dispatcher, Maddie Harper, a slim woman in her late 20s with short dark hair and sharp cheekbones, typed frantically, her fingers flying. Maddie had a reputation for never raising her voice, even in chaos. But tonight her usually steady tone cracked. A bolo is out statewide, deputy, Maddie said. Weather is degrading. Visibility at White Eagle Pass is near 0. Mark cursed quietly. White Eagle Pass. It was deadly even on a clear day. A door slammed open behind him. Sergeant Ethan Ward stood there, towering, snow-soaked, seething with a kind of rage that felt dangerous simply to be near. His uniform was half undone from the sprint. The cold wind still clung to his shoulders. Shadow stood at his side, tail stiff, ears forward, amber eyes burning with the instinct of a hunter. Mark turned. Ward, we've got her heading north, possibly toward the Canadian line. She won't get that far, Ethan growled. Not in this storm. Shadow barked once, sharp, decisive. Maddie swallowed. You think you know where she's going? Ethan locked eyes with her. There's only one mountain pass she can take without hitting a roadblock. His voice dropped. White Eagle Pass. Maddie's face drained of color. That place is deadly, Ethan finished, especially now. He knelt beside Shadow, gripping the dog's harness. The German shepherd's fur bristled under his touch, ready to run, muscles coiled like a spring. She's driving my SUV, Ethan said. Shadow can track it. Mark blinked. You sure he can smell a vehicle in a storm like this? Ethan's voice hardened. Shadow tracked missing Marines through avalanches. He'll track her. Shadow growled, low and certain. A new voice entered the room. Captain Boyd Calder, the air search commander, a tall man in his 50s with steel-gray hair, a deeply lined face, and the kind of hardened stoicism only men who had dug bodies out of snowfields carried, stepped forward. He wore a heavy aviation parka zipped to his neck, his jaw firm. A helicopter patch was stitched to his sleeve. This mission is off-road, zero sightline, catastrophic weather, Boyd said. It's insane. Ethan stared at him. So is a woman who tries to murder a child. Boyd held his gaze for a long moment, then finally exhaled. Get your gear. Minutes later, the storm above White Eagle Pass roared as the dark shape of a military helicopter blasted through the wind currents, cutting across the mountain's spine like a metal beast. The rotors churned the blizzard into screaming whirlwinds of ice. Inside the dim cabin, Ethan stood at the open side door, strapped into a harness. Snow whipped against his face, melted into streaks down his jawline. His blue-gray eyes scanned the landscape below. White chaos, a world erased by winter. Shadow stood beside him, anchored by a special rappelling vest, trained stance steady even as wind blasted into the aircraft. Captain Boyd Calder stood near the cockpit doorway, gripping a railing, barking orders into his headset. His deep voice fought to overpower the howl of the storm. Visibility at 30%, going lower, winds pushing us east, keep eyes open. The co-pilot, Rachel Nguyen, a Vietnamese-American woman in her early 30s with sharp features and determined brown eyes, adjusted the controls with the precision of a master pilot. Her black hair was tied into a tight bun beneath her helmet, jaw clenched as she navigated the freezing updrafts. She was known for one thing, being fearless in winter skies. Eyes on the road, she said through the comms. Something's down there, Ethan leaned out. Through the blizzard, barely visible, was an SUV, his SUV, skidded sideways across the icy bridge at the edge of White Eagle Pass. The back tires hung precariously over the guardrail, rocking dangerously every time wind slammed into it. She's there, Ethan said. Hover above the bridge. Boyd's voice cracked over the radio. Hold steady. Lower them down, Shadow barked. A deep, urgent sound, nose pointed downward. Ethan gripped the rappelling rope. Shadow, he said over the wind, with me. The dog braced himself, and then they dropped. Wind roared like a beast around them as Ethan and Shadow descended through the whipping snow. The rope swayed. Ice sliced across Ethan's cheeks, but he kept his gaze fixed on the bridge below. Shadow descended like a trained soldier, paws tense, body steady. They hit the ground hard. Ice cracked beneath Ethan's boots. The freezing wind knifed against his skin. Shadow's paws dug into snow, teeth bared, breath steaming through the air. Ahead of them, Vanessa Hale was already scrambling away from the SUV, her long hair whipping wildly in the wind. Her cream-colored coat was torn, and blood streaked her forehead, likely from hitting the steering wheel during the skid. She turned and froze when she saw Ethan. Her eyes widened in terror. Then she ran. She bolted across the bridge into the howling white wasteland, boots slipping, arms flailing. "Vanessa!" Ethan roared. "Stop!" She didn't. She sprinted desperately into the storm, screaming words he could barely hear over the wind. Shadow growled low. Ethan pointed forward. "Track!" Shadow lunged into the snow, nose to the ground, following her scent despite the gale. Ethan chased them both. The storm raged with lethal force. Snow blinded his eyes, bit into his skin. His breath came out in hot bursts, fogging instantly. Up ahead, Vanessa stumbled along the guardrail, gasping, her voice cracked raw. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Her boot slipped. She crashed into the snowbank, scrambling wildly, leaving deep, frantic prints. Shadow gained on her. Ethan pushed his exhausted legs harder. Then, A set of flashing emergency lights appeared through the white. Deputy Mark Hill's SUV skidded to a stop at the far end of the pass, followed by two more cruisers. Officers spilled out, silhouettes in heavy winter gear. Mark shouted, "Ethan, we've got her from this side!" Vanessa spun around, realizing she was trapped between two walls of storm and law. "No!" she screamed. "No!" She tried to run sideways, toward the cliff. Her foot slipped. Snow gave way under her heel. But Shadow reached her first. The dog leaped, grabbing her coat sleeve with his jaws, not to hurt her, but to stop her from plunging off the edge. She screamed, flailing, but Shadow held firm, muscles trembling with the effort. Ethan reached them, seizing her wrist, pulling her back from the cliff's edge. Snow collapsed under them, but Ethan's grip held fast. Officers swarmed in. Mark grabbed Vanessa's arms, snapping handcuffs around her wrists as she sobbed against the snow. "You're under arrest for attempted homicide," Mark said, breath steaming. "Stay down." Ethan exhaled shakily, the adrenaline finally draining. Shadow pressed against his leg. Ethan dropped to one knee and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. "You saved her," he whispered. "Again." Above them, the helicopter circled once, rotors chopping the stormy air. The blizzard raged on. But the chase was over. Snowfield's long winter was beginning to fracture under the slow return of light. Outside Teton County Court, the snow had softened into slush, reflecting the pale sun like shards of glass melting into water. The building itself, tall, square, made of gray stone with a sharp triangular roof, stood like an ancient guardian watching over the frozen town. Its columns were stiff with frost, and people entering stamped their boots, shaking winter from their coats before stepping inside. Sergeant Ethan Ward walked through the heavy courthouse doors with Shadow at his side. Ethan wore his Marine dress uniform for the hearing, a deep navy coat adorned with his service ribbons and the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem on his chest. The uniform emphasized his tall, powerful frame and the rugged lines of his face, particularly the scar beneath his left cheekbone and the stubble shadowing his strong jaw. His eyes, blue-gray and steady, held the kind of calm only men who had lived through war could possess, yet a father's grief still softened them at the edges. Shadow, the 5-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur and amber eyes, walked with silent confidence, head held high. He wore a bright blue vest bearing the words K9 Hero Unit, Snowfield. His movements were fluid and disciplined, every step measured, every glance alert. The dog had the presence of a seasoned soldier. Inside the courtroom, people stood as Ethan passed, citizens of Snowfield, nurses from the medical center, firefighters from the rescue unit. Their expressions held a strange mixture of sorrow, admiration, and anger. On the defense bench sat Vanessa Hale, her wrists cuffed, her hair a tangled mess of black waves. The once flawless beauty was gone. Her makeup had smudged into dull shadows beneath her eyes, and her cream-colored coat had been replaced by a county-issued gray jumpsuit. She looked smaller than before, her back hunched, her lips pale. Her almond-shaped eyes darted nervously around the room, no longer cold and confident, now hollow, feverish. Beside her sat Attorney Calvin Price, a thin man in his late 50s with a narrow face, long hooked nose, and a receding hairline tied back into a small, neat ponytail. He wore a dark suit with frayed cuffs and carried himself with the weary cynicism of a lawyer who had represented too many hopeless cases. His voice was dry, brittle, and impatient whenever he whispered to Vanessa. Calvin had a reputation for defending the accused without emotional involvement. Poverty in his childhood had taught him that truth didn't always matter. Technique did. But even he looked uneasy defending Vanessa today. Across the aisle sat the prosecution team, led by District Attorney Helena Morris, a formidable woman in her early 40s with strong cheekbones, pale olive skin, and sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses. Her black hair was tied tightly in a bun. Her charcoal suit was immaculate. Helena had built her career, fighting for vulnerable families in Wyoming's most isolated counties. She was not one to seek fame, only justice. The judge entered. Judge Samuel Grayson, a tall man in his early 60s with steel-gray hair, a broad-shouldered build, and deep lines etched into his forehead, sat with the posture of a man used to carrying burdens heavier than the gavel he held. His voice, deep, resonant, weathered, had settled countless disputes over decades. He was known throughout the state as fair but unyielding, especially when children were harmed. As the trial began, Helena Morris stood, straightening her jacket. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady and chillingly clear, "today we present proof of attempted murder against a minor, Lucy Ward, age 9. Evidence shows the defendant, Vanessa Hale, acted with intent. We begin with the hospital security footage." The lights dimmed. A screen descended behind the judge. Helena clicked the remote. The footage flickered to life. Room 407 appeared in grainy hospital tones. There was Lucy, small, fragile, pale beneath the blankets, and there was Vanessa, her slender frame standing over the little girl. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Vanessa on the screen looked calm, almost serene. And then, she reached forward. She pulled out the oxygen tube. Lucy's tiny body jerked violently on the bed, struggling for air. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Helena continued. "This video leaves no ambiguity." She switched to another clip. Lucy's vitals crashing, nurses rushing in, shadow barking, Ethan's voice screaming for help, Vanessa stumbling away from the bed. The footage cut. The lights returned. Vanessa stared at the table, trembling. Helena called her next witness, Dr. Rowan Spaulding, the ER physician who had first contacted Ethan. Rowan took the stand with an air of solemn dignity. His silver hair caught the courtroom lights, and his tired blue eyes seemed to carry the weight of every patient he had ever lost. "In your expert medical opinion," Helena asked, "would removing the oxygen tube have endangered Lucy Ward's life?" Rowan nodded slowly. "She would have died within minutes. And would a medical professional have known that? Without question, it is basic knowledge." Calvin Price rose for cross-examination, his lanky frame hunched slightly, voice dry. "Doctor, is there any scenario where a caregiver might accidentally—" "No," Rowan cut him off sharply, the first hint of anger showing. "None." The judge gave Calvin a pointed look. Calvin sat down silently. Next came the nurses. Kendra Lawson testified with a steady voice, her curly hair pinned back neatly. She spoke of Lucy's condition, of Vanessa's tense body language, of the exact moment Ethan arrived. Lily Armand and Miguel Duarte followed with matching accounts. Then Helena addressed the court again. "And now, the 911 call." The audio played. Dogs bark, a whine, a scratch against the phone, and Marla Jensen's calm, steady voice calling for help. The courtroom erupted with murmurs, astonishment, admiration, disbelief. Judge Grayson raised a hand. Silence returned instantly. Helena then called her final witness. "Sergeant Ethan Ward." Ethan stepped forward, tall, composed, but carrying the exhaustion of a father who had lived through days of terror. His Marine uniform seemed to anchor him, giving weight to his steady voice. He described finding Lucy, finding the tube, Shadow guarding her like a soldier at war, Vanessa's expression when he entered, her flight into the snowstorm, the pursuit through White Eagle Pass, and Shadow pulling her back from the cliff. The courtroom listened with held breath. "And why?" Helena asked softly. "Did you pursue her?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Because she tried to kill my daughter. And because men like me don't leave threats behind, not on the battlefield, not at home." Shadow, sitting beside him, lifted his head proudly. Calvin Price barely cross-examined. He knew the case was over. Judge Grayson leaned forward, voice like thunder. "Vanessa Hale, you stand convicted of attempted murder of a minor. This court sentences you to 20 years at Teton State Correctional Facility with no possibility of early release." Vanessa collapsed in her seat, sobbing. Officers lifted her to her feet and led her away. Her cuffs glinted in the cold courtroom light. Then, silence. Relief. Ethan exhaled shakily. Shadow pressed against his leg, and the nurses rose from their seats, clapping quietly. Lucy was safe. Weeks later, at Snowfield Medical Center, Lucy lay in a recovery room decorated with paper snowflakes, handmade cards from classmates, and a stuffed fox someone had left anonymously. Her cheeks had regained color, and her hazel eyes sparkled softly in the winter sunlight. Shadow lay with his head resting beside her ribs, tail thumping gently. Ethan stepped in, wearing a gray wool sweater and jeans, a rare moment out of uniform. He knelt beside the bed and brushed Lucy's hair gently behind her ear. "Daddy," Lucy whispered, smiling weakly. "Shadow saved me twice, at home and at the hospital." Ethan felt emotion tighten his throat. He placed a hand on Shadow's head. That's why he's now officially recognized, Ethan said. Hero K9 of Snowfield. Shadow huffed proudly. And, Ethan continued, reaching into his coat pocket, we're going to help other kids, kids like you, kids who need someone to fight for them. Lucy tilted her head. How? Ethan held up a folder with a new emblem, a snowflake forming into a heart. Ward Heart Foundation, he said, an organization to protect children with heart conditions and those abandoned or abused in winter towns across the country. Lucy beamed, tears warming her eyes. You're amazing, Daddy, he kissed her forehead gently. I've fought on battlefields all my life, sweetheart, but the most important battlefield is protecting you. Shadow pressed his nose to Lucy's cheek. Outside the window, the first snow of early spring began to fall, soft, gentle, and full of promise. And so, in a small town of endless winter, a new beginning was born. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not thunder from the sky, but quiet moments when God places the right people beside us, like a brave father, a loyal dog, or a stranger who shows kindness when the world feels cold. In our daily lives, we often walk past these small miracles without noticing them, forgetting that God still works through ordinary hearts and unexpected hands. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need hope today. Comment your thoughts below, subscribe to the channel, and may God watch over you and your loved ones wherever you are.